With Ashes of Creation, I share in the hype that so many have for this game. Many of the features of this game fit me very well as a player. I tend to think Ashes has a very good chance of succeeding, but I can see a few areas that could cause issues. One of the biggest of those concerns is how the mega guilds and alliances could dominate Ashes of Creation. A lot of what I'm going to say in this video is very much in the realm of theory, as we haven't seen these systems in game and working yet. But there's still a lot of information about the design that we can look at to get a feel for how some of this might play out. So the first thing I want to do is talk about the differences between a Zerg guild and a large organized guild. Basically, how I would define a Zerg guild is a huge unorganized mass of players that runs in a big group across the map. On the other hand, a large organized guild will have several smaller groups dispersed across the map with the correct number of people for the task and with people that are specialized in that task. There is a very big distinction between the two groups. The huge organized guild will do much better in virtually any MMO than the huge unorganized guild will. In Ashes, the mega organized guilds, I think, will do much better than the Zerg guild does in most MMOs, and I will explain why throughout this video. Organized mega guilds outperforming Zerg guilds is not what concerns me, however. What concerns me is how much the mega guilds could absolutely dominate the server and make life very hard for the smaller guilds. I personally have always preferred smaller guilds, so for me this very much matters. Before I talk about the mechanics Intrepid has said that could limit mega guilds, I first want to talk about how I think the highly organized large guilds might dominate from a gearing and level perspective, which could give them a huge advantage in terms of sieges and open world PvP. Basically, these large guilds might have a highly organized roster of players, each of which is doing their role. With the way the artisan system is structured, players cannot do everything themselves. Crafters are reliant on gatherers and processors, and gatherers are reliant on crafters and processors. So in order to streamline this process, the Mega Guild sets up their crafters and processors in a metropolis node that is somewhat centrally located on a continent, and in theory has a node type and node buildings that might be the most beneficial to crafters. Scientific nodes are focused on artisan classes and construction, so this would be a natural home for a large guild to set up their crafters. Also, the mayor of a scientific node is elected democratically, which means a large guild could easily secure enough citizens to secure the mayorship. The mayor could then supplement the scientific node's benefits to their crafters by building constructible node buildings such as the marketplace to make this an ideal location for crafters to set up. Further, the guild has gatherers go out seeking the materials needed for the crafters, some of which could be very far away. A mega guild could have 20 or more 8-man gathering groups spread out all over the continent finding the materials needed for the crafters. Then you'll have groups that are dedicated to running these supplies back to the crafters and processors via the caravans. There will be a constant stream of materials moving to the crafters, which leads them to very quickly getting their crafting levels up and gearing out the guild. This gives a big advantage, as gear is a big boost to player stats in this game. Eventually, crafters will need drops from raid bosses to craft the best gear in the game. And with the numbers advantage combined with the gearing advantage, these guilds should have enough advantages to secure a lot of world boss kills and fight off PvP attackers. So I think it is fair to say that a very large, organized guild can secure a huge advantage just in terms of crafting gear for its guild. But with the numbers and now gear advantage, I think they can snowball their power even more by taking control of castles and becoming patrons of metropolis nodes. And I think they will have the advantage in sieges with this gear advantage, especially as the defender in node sieges on the higher tier nodes, as the higher level nodes come with a natural defender advantage. Castle siege defense depends on how the weekly castle node leveling events go. But with the large numbers, resources, and gear advantage of the Mega Guild, I think it might be pretty easy for these guilds to get these castle nodes leveled up each week. Steven has mentioned the node and castle systems as a mechanic that could limit Mega Guilds. However, it could just as easily become a mechanic that empowers the Mega Guilds. Nodes can be sieged and destroyed, and control of the castle exerts pressure on 1/5 of the map, which could put pressure on the home nodes of the Mega Guild if you control that castle. The problem is, I think the mega guilds will be very hard to defeat in sieges, and it might be very hard to get control of the castle from these guilds. And then the mega guild gets stronger and snowballs their advantage by owning the castle and becoming a patron of a metropolis node, both of which comes with some major benefits to these guilds. Castle owners get to set the tax rate, which they could set very high if they do not like the guilds that are under the influence of the castle. This castle tax is then directed towards castle upgrades, but a percentage of these taxes are usable by the guild that owns the castle. And it is not just that. The castle owner can activate events and unlock special buildings within nodes that could also benefit them. On top of all these benefits, the benefits are said to increase the longer a guild owns these castles. And we don't know if guilds or alliances will be able to control more than one castle on the server. If they can control more than one, then the advantage could be staggering. And if they can't, they could get around the limitation by having different guilds control each castle, each of which is a sub-guild of the main guild. Also, I think mega guilds have a better chance to become patrons of nodes. To become a patron of a node, you simply need to contribute the most amount of work to a node's development. For an organized large guild, that should not be a huge problem. And with that patron status, the guild gets further benefits that continue to snowball its power. One limiting factor that could prevent one guild from dominating is that the sieges have a limited and even amount of players on each side. 250 versus 250 and possibly as high as 500 versus 500. However, the large guild can pick and choose the best geared and skilled players to participate in these sieges. This process could certainly cause some infighting as some people are not picked, but in the end, the large guild, due to their possible gear advantage, I think should field a formidable force. One thing I have historically seen is that often these large guilds do not have the most skilled players necessarily. So perhaps if the smaller guilds can field more talented players, they could win in this size limited format. But I still think it could be a very difficult thing to pull off because of the potential gear disparity. Much of what Intrepid has said about limiting the strength of large guilds relates to Zergs, which, again, are unorganized, large groups of players. The primary mechanic that Intrepid usually talks about in terms of Zergs is the large size of the world and the lack of fast travel. This is true. A huge mass of players that roam in a big circle on the map might not be in the right place when that valuable world boss spawns, which allows a smaller guild to kill it before the Zerg arrives. This mechanic might successfully negate the Zerg in that regard, but what about an organized mega guild or alliance? Will this affect them as much? Well, let's look at this map created by Twitter user Amos Games. This speculates where the 15 world bosses could be located. They are somewhat evenly dispersed across the map, as you would expect. What if the Mega Guild has their primary node being a metropolis somewhat centrally located in the Riverlands, which is a natural place I think a lot of metropolises will be placed on a lot of servers due to its central location, access to a bay, close proximity to several biomes, and proximity to a starting area which will naturally boost nearby nodes early in the server. And we also know that the Riverlands has all 4 seasons, which could be an advantage as well. So this is a logical place for a metro node to be established. There are 4 world bosses potentially very close in this scenario, but how close in terms of time? Well, we know that travel from the top to bottom of the continent on a mount will take 50 minutes. I'm not going to talk about running time because people will not run long distances in Ashes. They will be using mounts as soon as they can. So if we measure the pixels of height of Vandegar, we see that it is 322 pixels tall. This means that per pixel it takes 0.16 minutes or 9.3 seconds to travel that 1 pixel. Now we can just measure the distance to each boss from the center of this metro node to get the travel time to each boss. The shortest boss is 8 minutes from the metro. The longest is 22 minutes from the metro, again on a mount. So we have 4 bosses that are all under 25 minutes on mount from this metro, which the Mega Guild has set up as their primary node. They will control these 4 bosses at a minimum. That and the truly Mega Guilds might have patron guilds in other metros and in vassal nodes, and thus can control another 4 to 5 bosses very easily. This also doesn't include the faster travel that will likely exist between the metro node and the vassal nodes, which could easily extend towards these boss locations. This also doesn't include that players could eventually get even faster mounts than what I assume is an average mount speed they gave in the live stream. The faster travel between vassal nodes and faster mounts as well could mean the reach of these mega guilds from their patron nodes will be even bigger than 4 to 5 bosses. And an organized guild will not have all its members camped in one node either. In fact, I think that will be far from the optimal way for a large guild to structure its citizenship. The crafters might set up shop in the scientific nodes, but the PvPers might set up shop in a military node. Healers might be in divine nodes, and some might be in the economic nodes to sell some of the crafted materials to other guilds to build up the guild's economic power even further. And there will be gathering groups, again, that will be dispersed across the map, meaning there will be a lot of opportunities for a group within a mega guild to be close to a boss spawn location. So, no, I don't think the world size will deter the organized large guilds, especially when you consider they will likely have access to great artisans that can breed them the best mounts. What is another factor that Intrepid is trying to use to deter the effect of mega guilds? They are limiting the size of a guild to 300, and as a trade-off for having a guild that size, guilds will not be able to unlock power-boosting guild talents, whereas the smaller 30 to 50 size guilds will be able to do that. So first, let's talk about the 300 guild roster limit and how a 1200 player guild will get around that. They will simply make 4 guilds of 300 and join them into an alliance. The max alliance size is 4 guilds, and the alliance will have a guild alliance bank and a chat channel. This essentially makes this alliance a 1200 person guild. If a guild wants to be bigger than 1200, they just make another alliance. Now, will the power boosts afforded to the small guilds offset this? We don't know, but my hope is these boosts are very strong to help offset the effect of mega guilds and give the smaller guilds a chance. In theory, an alliance of 4 50-man guilds that are all maximum boosted with guild talents and with very good gear and good players could be a formidable foe in sieges. And 200 players is a decent amount. One thing that helps these smaller guilds is the limitations on how many players can be in a siege. So if you could pack a siege with highly skilled players that are fully boosted by the guild talents, it could help offset the gear advantage of the mega guilds. But the problem is, if they make these small guild boosts too strong, then the mega guilds will simply just splinter into more guilds. However, if they do this, it opens up another possibility. The idea that all this splintering and separating groups into smaller guilds could create some division within the larger guild. This is something that Steven has mentioned in the past as a possible way mega guilds will be controlled. This is, however, not a guarantee. These sort of things do happen, and they probably will happen to some extent, but I am not sure it is enough to rely on this occurring. Another potential limitation of mega guilds is the affiliation tree. Guilds are below node citizenship, so a node war could put guilds against each other, which could cause inter-guild drama. Again, I wouldn't rely on this, but it could and probably will happen to some degree. The biggest issue I see with this is that vassals cannot go to war with parent nodes, and a lot of guilds will probably have their sub-guilds as patron of their main metro node, as only 3 guilds can be a patron of a metro node. And I don't want to read too much into one quote, but I did find a quote from Steven that seemed to acknowledge that a large, organized guild could dominate a server. I think with the open world nature of this game, there really is not a lot of ways around that. And to be honest, I'm fine with it. I think the thing to do is to plan for it and try to make plans for how to counter it. Smaller guilds will need to form alliances, and those alliances might even need to form further alliances. The game does not support alliances joining together in-game, but that can be done externally pretty easily. These smaller guilds can then get organized and pool their resources to counter the large guilds. With the power boosting guild talents available to these guilds, it might be possible if, say, 20-50 person guilds get organized and help each other with gearing and resources that they could compete with the 4 300 person guilds that form into a mega alliance. But getting that many individual entities on the same page is never easy, of course. And it is entirely possible that once we get into Alpha 2, none of this ends up being a problem. We are still in a very speculative phase until we see these systems in action. That is all I have for this video. Consider subscribing if you liked the video. With that, I will see you in the next video.